He never even lifted his eyes from the espresso when he said it. Equity? For you. Roderick Vance set the cup down with a soft click. Then he laughed, not cruelly, which somehow made it land harder. Light, the kind of laugh you'd give a kid who asked for the car keys. Sweetheart, I built Hollowbrook. You just keep the lights on. He lifted the cup again. Honestly, maybe it's time you walked away. Find something more your size. 6 years. 6 years I'd spent turning his 40 struggling tea shops into the tightest specialty retail operation in the region. I rebuilt the supply chain from the ground up, wrote the inventory system the whole company still ran on, trained every district manager who ever picked up his calls. And in that moment, over an espresso he didn't think to offer me. He told me I was the help. So I smiled, told him he was probably right. And 41 days later, every single one of his storefronts went dark on the same Tuesday morning. And Roderick Vance never once understood why. Welcome to the payback files where the people everyone underestimates keep the receipts. This one builds slowly, but the collapse at the end is worth every minute of the wait. My name is Samantha Hale. Back then, I was director of operations at Hollowbrook Tea House, 40 premium loose-leaf shops spread across 3 states, copper kettles, blending counters, lines out the door on cold mornings. I didn't own any of it. I was the person who made sure there was something worth owning. I didn't grow up around money. My parents ran a small hardware store in Wheeling, West Virginia, the kind of place where my dad could tell you which screws you needed before you finished explaining the project. We weren't poor, just careful. What that upbringing gave me wasn't a chip on my shoulder. It was an instinct for people. I learned early that the person stocking the shelves usually understands a business better than the one signing the checks, because the shelf stocker can't afford to be wrong. I learned to treat the new hire and the regional VP with the same patience, because you never know which one will remember how you made them feel. Roderick never picked up that lesson. What he learned instead was that money makes people defer to you, and he'd had that confirmed so many times he stopped bothering to check whether it was actually true. I came to Hollowbrook when it was 9 stores and hemorrhaging cash. Gorgeous shops, loyal customers, and a back end held together with spreadsheets and hope. Stores would run dry on house blend on a Saturday, while a full pallet of it rotted in a warehouse 40 miles out. Roderick had bought the company on the cheap, betting he could squeeze it into profitability. I turned out to be the thing that made that bet pay off. For the first 2 years he listened to me, not out of respect but out of fear. He didn't understand the operation. I did. A scared man will hand you the keys and call it delegation. So I rebuilt everything. Designed the central ordering system linking all 40 stores to one supply hub, negotiated every vendor contract, wrote the training manual from scratch. By year 4, a customer at any Hollowbrook location got the exact same cup, made the exact same way, restocked by an invisible machine humming along underneath it all. That machine was mine, built by my own hands and a team I'd assembled person by person. What I hadn't grasped was that Roderick believed anything built for him automatically belonged to him. And the day I asked to share in what I'd made would be the day he showed me, in full, who he actually was. The idea itself didn't arrive in some dramatic flash. It came on a Sunday night in February at my kitchen table, calculator out, vendor renewals spread across the surface. I was running the numbers on what the next 3 years would demand of me. Hollowbrook was expanding into a 4th state. A dozen new stores, a second supply hub, an entirely new layer of district managers I'd have to recruit and train myself. My evenings, my weekends, the version of me answering work emails at my niece's birthday party. I'd been handing the company that version of me for 6 years, for a salary that was decent but was still just a salary. A number that never moved even as the company's value doubled. Then doubled again, largely on the strength of work I'd done. I wasn't bitter about it. I'd gone into the arrangement believing I was already a partner in everything but title. So I built a proposal. Clean, professional, the kind of standard franchise equity agreement companies our size used all the time. I wasn't asking him to hand me anything. An equity match tied to performance, vesting over 4 years if I hit growth targets I was already responsible for delivering anyway. Single digits, the kind of stake that costs an owner almost nothing and buys him a director who'll run through walls for him. I attached financials, comparables, and updated resume not to prove myself but to make the whole thing feel serious like the professional ask it was. I rehearsed my opening line twice in the car, sitting in the Hollowbrook lot, a converted brick warehouse in Cincinnati's Arts District. His office sat on the top floor. Reclaimed wood, a river view. An espresso machine in the corner that cost more than my first car. He was making himself a cup when I walked in. Didn't offer me one. I noticed and told myself not to read too much into it. I laid the packet on his desk and walked him through it calmly, the way I'd walk a vendor through a contract, expansion, retention, the cost of replacing me, the greater cost of replacing me, and watching the whole operation wobble without its architect. I explained how the agreement protected him, vesting tied to milestones, so he risked nothing unless I actually delivered. He let me finish. Let me get all the way to the end before he lifted the cup, took a slow sip and set it down with that click. Equity? For you. Then he laughed. I've replayed that laugh 1,000 times since. It wasn't anger. Anger at least means you've been heard. This was amusement. He found the whole idea genuinely warmly funny. Sweetheart, Roderick said. I built Hollowbrook. You just keep the lights on. I opened my mouth. He kept talking. Look, you're good at what you do. Nobody's saying otherwise. But ownership? That's a different animal. That's risk. Vision. He waved a hand, searching for the word, and when he found it, something in me came loose. You're a caretaker, Samantha. A very good caretaker. And there's no shame in that. He slid the packet back across the desk, unread past the first page. I could see it. The tab marking where the financials began was still folded exactly as I'd left it. Honestly, he said, and the kindness in his voice was the worst part. Maybe it's time you walked away. Find something more your size. No hard feelings. There's a particular stillness that settles over you when someone shows you their whole self in one breath. Everything went quiet and clear. I wasn't hurt yet, that came later in the car. In that moment I just felt the ground shift and a new fact lock into place, solid and permanent. He genuinely believed the machine was his. Believed it ran because he owned it. He'd never once stopped to consider it ran because I ran it, that all 40 of those stores stayed lit because of relationships, systems, and trust that lived in my head, and because of a team loyal to me, not to him. I picked up my packet, smiled, and said, You know what, Roderick, you might be right. And I meant something entirely different than what he heard. I didn't slam any doors. Rode the elevator down, walked to my car, sat, and cried for 90 seconds, clean, sharp, just my body discharging shock. Then I stopped, wiped my face, and did the thing I do best. I made a list. A caretaker always knows where everything is. Knows which wires are load-bearing and which are decorative. Roderick had spent 6 years walking through a house I maintained, admiring the architecture, never once asking who. Knew where the fuse box was. I knew because I'd installed it. So sitting in that lot I started tallying what was actually mine, not legally, that was the cruel joke, legally none of it was, but functionally. Operationally. Who would walk if I did, and what would stop working the moment I stopped touching it? First, the people. Hollowbrook's corporate operations team was 11 strong. And I'd hired every single one of them myself. Not rubber stamped through HR, recruited. I'd found Priya on and doing a thankless job for a distributor and seen in 20 minutes what nobody else had bothered to notice. I'd pulled Desmond Okafor out of a help desk role he was wildly overqualified for. A vendor relations manager, a training coordinator, 2 regional operations specialists. All people I'd found, fought for, mentored, defended in budget meetings, and stood behind whenever they'd stumbled. They were loyal to Hollowbrook the way you're loyal to a building. They were loyal to me the way you're loyal to a person who actually saw you. Roderick knew their names, not their phone numbers. He'd never once taken any of them to lunch. Second, the system. The central ordering platform tying all 40 stores to the supply hub. Telling a Columbus manager exactly how much oolong to pull on a Thursday. I designed it. Desmond and I built it together. It ran on infrastructure I'd set up, vendor accounts under my name, logic only the two of us fully understood. Roderick referred to it simply as the software, the way you'd refer to electricity as the power. A thing that just existed, that he was owed, that required no thought because it never failed him. It never failed because I never let it. Third, the relationships. Every vendor contract Hollowbrook held, I'd negotiated. Every supplier had my cell number. Tea importers, the packaging company, logistics carriers, the point-of-sale provider. When they thought Hollowbrook, they pictured my face. Roderick was a signature on a page. I was the voice on the phone at 6 a.m. when a shipment got stuck at port. Sitting there with my list, something occurred to me so simple it almost made me laugh. Roderick didn't own a company. He owned a name and leases on 40 storefronts. The actual living machine, the people, the system, the relationships wasn't bolted to the building. It was bolted to me. He just told me in so many words that he believed it worked the other way around. Believed value lived in brick and brand, and people were interchangeable parts servicing his vision. Told me to go find something my size. The problem for him was that I now understood exactly what my size was. A lot bigger than he'd ever let himself imagine, because the whole arrangement had only ever worked as long as I kept pretending otherwise. I drove home and told no one yet. Not my husband, not my team. I needed to be certain I wasn't acting on wounded pride, because plans built on wounded pride collapse the moment the wound heals. I needed it cold. I needed it correct. So for 2 weeks I did my job flawlessly, better than ever, showed up early, solved problems, smiled through meetings, and quietly, with no one the wiser, I tested a single question. If I left exactly as he'd suggested, how much of Hollowbrook would come with me? The answer turned out to be almost all of it. The first conversation wasn't with my team. It was with myself in the form of a phone call I'd been putting off for 2 years, to Theo Brandt, who ran the Larkspur Syndicate, a coalition of investors and operators who pooled money and talent to launch or rescue businesses fast. He'd tried recruiting me twice before. Once at a logistics conference, once over coffee, and both times he'd said the same thing. You're running someone else's company for free. When you're tired of that, call me. I'd kept his card. People like me always keep the card. I called him Wednesday from my car. The same car I'd cried in 2 weeks earlier. I didn't lead with grievance. I led with the asset. I told him I had a fully operational, battle-tested retail operations team of 11, a proven central logistics system, and relationships with every major vendor in the specialty tea supply chain. Told him I could stand up a competing operation faster than anyone he'd ever worked with, because I wasn't building one from scratch. I was bringing one that already existed, fully formed, in the heads and hands of people who'd follow me out the door. A pause, then Theo said, "How fast?" 60 days to soft launch, I said. 40 stores worth of operational capacity. Ready to deploy. Only thing missing is storefronts, and storefronts are just rent. He laughed. Nothing like Roderick's laugh. Roderick had said I was adorable. Theo said, "You're dangerous and I want you on my side." We met 3 days later in a downtown glass conference room. I walked Larkspur through everything. Not a shred of Hollowbrook's confidential data. I was scrupulous about that. I never took a file, never copied a contract, never touched a single thing that wasn't mine to take. I want that clearly understood. I didn't steal a company. What I brought was the thing Roderick had spent 6 years failing to notice. He never owned me, and the people who trusted me. The plan was clean. Larkspur would fund a new venture, a premium tea retail brand, structured from day one with real equity for the operating team, actual ownership, vesting schedules, exactly what I'd asked Roderick for, except this time I'd own a meaningful piece, and so would Priya, Desmond, everyone who came with me. We'd open in the same markets, hire the same caliber of staff, and do it with the one advantage Roderick's money could never buy. We already knew how to run 40 stores because we'd been doing it for years. Then came the part that would turn a smart business move into something Roderick would feel in his bones. The vendors. Every one of Hollowbrook's supply contracts ran on annual renewals, and a wave of them clustered around quarter end. I knew because I tracked them. These weren't really Hollowbrook's relationships. They were mine, only attached to Hollowbrook because I happened to be standing there. The importers, the packaging supplier, the logistics carriers worked with Hollowbrook because I was easy to work with, paid on time, and had helped them out of jams more than once. If I showed up at a new venture and said, "Come with me," plenty would listen. I wasn't going to sabotage Roderick's contracts. I didn't need to. I just needed to be ready the day I left, to offer those vendors a better partner and let them make their own choice. But the real lever, the thing that would actually make the lights go dark, was the system. The central ordering platform all 40 stores depended on, the thing Roderick dismissively called the software. Desmond and I had built it. The vendor accounts it ran on sat under my name and his. The architecture lived in our heads, and, this still amazes me when I think about Roderick's carelessness, nobody else at Hollowbrook understood any of it. No documentation he controlled. No backup administrator he'd insisted on. He'd never asked because asking would mean admitting it was complicated, and admitting it was complicated would mean admitting he needed me. I'd begged him 18 months earlier to let me hire a second systems person for redundancy. He'd said, "No, too expensive. That's what we have you for." His exact words. I'd written them down at the time because they stung. Now they read like a confession. So the plan had 3 legs. Bring the people, offer the vendors a better home. And on the day I walked out, let the operational nervous system of Hollowbrook leave inside the heads of the only 2 people who understood it. I wasn't going to break anything. I was simply going to stop holding it together. And I'd do it on my own schedule in a way he'd never see coming, while Roderick Vance stood around his country club telling people he'd finally cleared out some dead weight in operations. I told my team on a Thursday evening off-site, in the back room of a quiet restaurant I'd booked and paid for under my own name. I thought hard about how to handle it. I didn't want to recruit them out of anger. Come with me because Roderick's a monster is a bad foundation. Anger fades and people end up stranded. I wanted to recruit them with truth and opportunity, and let them decide like the adults they were. So I told them plainly what had happened in that office, the laugh, the caretaker, the find something more your size, no dressing it up. I watched it land on each face and what I saw wasn't shock. It was recognition. Everyone had felt some version of it. Priya had been passed over for a title bump 3 times. Desmond had built the system running the entire company, and was once mistaken for IT support by Roderick at a holiday party. They knew exactly who this man was. They just never heard anyone say it out loud. Then I told them about Larkspur, about the new venture, about equity, real ownership for all of them, written into founding documents, not dangled and laughed at. I told them I wasn't asking for anything illegal, anything they'd need to be ashamed of, anything that couldn't be done with heads held high. No stolen files, no sabotage. We'd each give proper notice, walk out the front door like professionals, then go build something better that we actually owned. I told them they could say no, and I meant it. If they wanted to stay at Hollowbrook, I'd write glowing references and never hold it against them, and this conversation would stay between us regardless. Nobody said no. Priya went first. No speech. She just slid her water glass to the center of the table and said, "When do we start?" One by one the rest followed. Desmond was last, quiet for a long moment, and then he said the thing that told me he understood the real leverage even better than I'd spelled it out. "You know, when we go, the platform goes. There's nobody left who can run it." He didn't say it like a threat. He said it like a man realizing the size of what he was actually holding. "I know," I said. "That's not our problem to solve. We offered to fix that a year ago." He said no. We picked a date, not impulsively, operationally, working backward from what mattered, the same way I picked everything. The new venture needed 6 weeks to get a legal entity formed, initial funding wired, a first lease signed. Vendor renewals clustered at quarter end. And I wanted to leave Hollowbrook on a clean boundary, after the current month's operations were fully closed out, so no one could say I'd walked out mid-crisis and left customers stranded. I wasn't handing Roderick a grievance. I was handing him a perfectly ordinary, perfectly legal, perfectly devastating 2 weeks' notice. So for 6 weeks, 11 people worked 2 jobs. By day we ran Hollowbrook better than it had ever been run, literally. That month's numbers were the best in company history. Stores fully stocked, vendors happy, the system humming along. I wanted the contrast stark. I wanted the before picture flawless so the after would be unmistakable. A machine running perfectly, and then a machine with no one left at the controls. By night we built the new thing. Larkspur moved fast. The entity got a name, Verdant Hill, clean and simple. Funding came through. Theo turned out to be everything Roderick wasn't. He asked questions, he listened, he wrote our ownership stakes into the founding documents before I even had to push for it. We signed our first lease for a flagship location in Columbus, 2 miles from an existing Hollowbrook store. Then a second lease. Then a third. And then I started making quiet calls. Not to poach Hollowbrook's vendors, I was always careful about that line. I simply called suppliers whose contracts happened to be coming up for renewal anyway. People who knew my voice, and told them the truth. I was leaving Hollowbrook, starting something new, and when their renewal came around they should know they had options. I didn't ask them to break anything, didn't ask them to commit to anything. I just made sure that when the moment came, the better option had a name and a face they already trusted. Most of them didn't hesitate. The packaging family, whom I'd once helped out of a cash crunch, said, "Samantha, wherever you go, we go." The logistics carrier said the same. One by one, relationships I'd built over years started quietly turning in a new direction, like iron filings drifting toward a magnet that had simply moved across the table. Roderick noticed none of it. Why would he? The numbers were the best they'd ever been. From where he sat, top floor, espresso in hand, river view, everything looked perfect. He'd cleared out some dead weight, and the machine was humming right along. He had no idea it was humming through its very last perfect lap before walking straight out the door. I gave my notice on a Monday morning. Did it by the book, printed letter, 2 weeks, professional down to the last comma. I walked up to the top floor, and Roderick was at the espresso machine again. I swear the man lived up there. I set the letter on his desk the same way I'd set the equity packet down 6 weeks earlier. He read the first line, and I watched his face do something almost comical. A flicker of surprise, quickly smoothed over into something he wanted me to read as indifference. "Well," Roderick said, "can't say I'm shocked after our little talk." He set the letter down. "You'll be all right, Samantha. Caretakers always land somewhere." He actually smiled, pleased with himself, as if my leaving confirmed his read on me rather than exposing it. "I'm sure I will," I said. He never asked where I was going. That's the detail I keep coming back to. A curious man, a careful man would have asked. But Roderick had already filed me under resolved problem. And you don't investigate a problem you've already decided is solved. He waved me out with breezy good cheer and went back to his espresso, with no idea that 9 other resignation letters were about to land that same week. They came in over the following 3 days, staggered, each one professional, each with proper notice. Priya, Desmond, the vendor relations manager, the training coordinator, 2 regional specialists, one after another, the entire operational backbone of Hollowbrook handing in notice within 72 hours. Now Roderick noticed. He heard about it secondhand from someone who'd stayed. By Wednesday, the breeziness was gone. By Thursday, he was in HR demanding to know what was happening. Was this coordinated? Was this even legal? And the answer to that last one was yes, entirely irritatingly legal. 11 Hollowbrook employees had each independently chosen to resign with proper notice. No contract broken, no non-compete violated. Roderick had never bothered drafting any, too cheap for the legal fees, too confident he was irreplaceable. No property stolen. We'd taken nothing but ourselves. He called me Thursday afternoon. The first time he'd ever dialed my personal cell in 6 years. "Samantha." His voice had a new texture to it, strained, working hard at casual. "I'm hearing some things. Sounds like half my operations team is walking out behind you. Quite a coincidence." "People make their own choices, Roderick," I said. "Where are you all going?" And there it was, the question he hadn't bothered asking on Monday. "I'm starting something new," I said. "Some people decided they'd rather come along." I didn't twist any arms. "You're welcome to ask them yourself." A long silence. I could hear him recalculating. The breezy man discovering in real time that the floor he'd been standing on belonged to someone else. "You sign things," he said finally. "Confidentiality, you can't just—" "I read every word I signed, and so did a lawyer," I said. "I haven't taken a single file, a single contract, a single line of code that wasn't mine. I'd encourage you to confirm that because you'll find it's true. I'm not your problem, Roderick. I'm just gone." I hung up. The 2 weeks ran out. We worked every day of them, fully and honestly, right to the last one. I closed out the month, left detailed transition notes. Genuinely, because that's who I am, and I wasn't going to let customers suffer for Roderick's choices. I documented everything I could. I just couldn't document the one thing that actually mattered because the thing that mattered wasn't a document. It was 6 years of knowing. Then on a Friday we left. All of us. The operational nervous system of Hollowbrook Tea House walked out the front door, smiled at the receptionist, and drove away. For 72 hours nothing happened. That's the part people never expect. The lights don't go out the second you walk away. A machine running perfectly has momentum. Stores open Saturday. Open Monday. Inventory I'd ordered before leaving kept arriving on schedule. From the outside, Hollowbrook looked completely fine. I imagine Roderick spent that weekend telling himself, "See, it runs, the caretaker's gone and it still runs." But underneath, the clock had already started because the central ordering platform, the thing deciding what every store ordered, when, and how much, runs on a cycle. Weekly reorders, vendor purchase orders that need a human to review, adjust, and approve. The system can suggest. It can't decide. And it definitely can't handle exceptions. A held shipment, a demand spike, a supplier shorting an order. For 6 years the human handling all of that had been me, then Desmond. Now there was no one. The first reorder cycle after we left came due the following Wednesday, and there was nobody left at Hollowbrook who knew how to run it. The first thing to go wrong was so small nobody there even recognized it as the beginning. That Wednesday the system did exactly what it was built to do. Generated suggested orders for all 40 stores based on sales velocity, current stock, lead times. But suggestions aren't orders. Someone has to review them, catch the anomalies, adjust for what the algorithm can't know, and approve them before purchase orders actually fire to vendors. Nobody did because nobody knew that step existed. Whoever Roderick had scrambled to put in charge, I heard later it was a marketing manager he'd reassigned, a decent guy thrown into a cockpit he'd never seen before, looked at a dashboard full of green checkmarks and assumed green meant done. Green meant ready for a human. The orders just sat there, generated and unsent, while the system patiently waited for an approval that was never coming. By the time anyone realized the purchase orders hadn't gone out, they were 4 days behind, and in specialty retail, 4 days behind on reorders is how you go from fully stocked to bare shelves faster than you'd think possible, because lead times only protect you if you order on time. Miss the window and the gap compounds. The next cycle runs late too, and the one after that, until you're no longer behind by days but by an entire supply rhythm that took years to calibrate. Then the vendors started calling, and couldn't reach anyone who knew anything. For years, when a supplier had a question, a substitution, a price change, a shipping delay, they called me directly on my cell. Now they were calling a corporate line that routed them to people who couldn't tell house blend from seasonal reserve, who couldn't answer a single question about packaging specs, who had no authority to approve a substitution. The relationships had a name and a face, and the name and face were gone. And that's where the renewals came in. The cluster of vendor contracts I'd been tracking, the ones bunched at quarter end, came due. And when they did, suppliers had a clear choice in front of them. On one side, Hollowbrook, suddenly chaotic, no one answering the phone, late on every order, run by a man most of them had never even spoken to. On the other, Verdant Hill, a brand new operation run by the exact person they'd trusted for years, who'd always paid on time, who'd bailed some of them out of jams, who was simply easy to work with. It wasn't even a hard call. The packaging family went first, the ones who'd told me, wherever you go, we go. Then the logistics carrier. Then one of the 2 tea importers, the bigger one, the one supplying the blends Hollowbrook was actually known for. None of them breached anything. They simply declined to renew with Hollowbrook and signed with us instead, which is about the most ordinary thing in the world. Roderick experienced it as an ambush. From where he sat, his suppliers were betraying him. His shelves were mysteriously emptying. His team had conspired against him. He couldn't see the thread running through it all, because he'd never understood the thread existed. He thought he'd lost some staff and hit a rough patch. What had actually happened was that the entire living infrastructure of his company had quietly relocated 2 miles down the road, and he was now competing against it with an empty building and a brand name. The stores started going dark, not all at once, which was almost worse, but in a cascade. First the smaller locations, the ones with the thinnest inventory buffers. A store would simply run out of house blend, out of seasonal offerings, out of the things people actually walked in for. And with no functioning reorder system and vendors no longer renewing, nothing was coming to refill the shelves. A tea house with empty shelves isn't a tea house anymore. It's just a room. Managers, getting no answers from a corporate office in freefall, started doing the math on their own paychecks and walking. I didn't celebrate any of it. I want to be honest about that because the satisfying version of this story has me watching it all burn with a drink in my hand, and that's not what happened. What I actually felt watching Hollowbrook unravel from a distance was something quieter, a strange kind of indication that wasn't really about Roderick at all. It was about the truth finally becoming visible. For 6 years the value I'd created had been invisible, folded into a salary, dismissed as keeping the lights on. It was a Tuesday evening about 2 months after I'd walked out. I almost didn't recognize the number. He was calling from a personal cell this time, not the office, and somehow that detail told me everything before he said a word. The office version of Roderick didn't exist anymore. This was just the man. I let it ring twice, then answered. Samantha. The breeziness was gone. The amusement was gone. What was left was quiet, tired, and for the first time in 6 years careful. I think you know why I'm calling. I might, I said. Not cruel, just even. 40 stores, Roderick said. I'm closing 40 stores. The last ones go dark this week. I've got vendors who won't return. A man sitting in the wreckage of the thing he'd been too proud to share. I could have twisted the knife. There was a version of me, the one who'd cried in the parking lot, that wanted to. Instead, I just told him the truth because the truth was heavier than anything cruel I could have said. I asked you for a small piece of something I'd spent 6 years building, I said. Single digits tied to performance. It would have cost you almost nothing. And you laughed, called me a caretaker, and told me to find something my size. I let that sit a second. I did, Roderick. This was my size. It always was. You just couldn't see it because seeing it would have meant admitting you needed me. And admitting you needed me was the one thing you were never willing to do. Silence on the line. Was it personal? He asked finally. All of this, was it to ruin me? No, I said, and I meant it. I never sabotaged a thing. Never took a file. I gave notice. My team gave notice. Your vendors made their own choices when their contracts came up. I didn't break Hollowbrook, Roderick. I just stopped being the reason it didn't break. There's a difference. And the fact that you can't see it is the whole reason we're having this call. He didn't argue. I think somewhere in those 2 months he'd done enough math on his own to know it was true. He asked, almost gently, if there was any way I'd come back, consult, help him stand it back up. I told him no. Not out of anger, just finality, because the people who'd built it with me now owned a piece of something better. And you don't ask people to leave a house they own in order to go repair a house that locked them out. He thanked me, which surprised me, and then he hung up, and I never spoke to Roderick Vance again. Hollowbrook closed all 40 storefronts within the month. The brand name got sold off in pieces to cover what he owed on the leases. Last I heard, Roderick had moved to a smaller market and was talking up his next venture, which I genuinely hope goes well for him, because I was never in the business of wishing ruin on anyone. I just stopped being in the business of preventing it for him. Verdant Hill is 22 stores now, and growing every quarter. Priya runs all of logistics and owns a real, vested stake in the company she helped build. Desmond is our head of systems, and one of the very first capital requests I approved was hiring him, the redundant analyst I'd once begged Roderick for and been refused. We documented everything. Built it to survive any one of us leaving, because we'd all seen up close what it costs a company to let its entire knowledge base live inside 2 people's heads while treating them like furniture. We didn't just build a better business. We built a fairer one. Everyone who runs Verdant Hill owns a piece of Verdant Hill. That was the whole point. It was always the whole point. People sometimes ask if I have regrets, whether I'd go back and skip asking for equity, keep my head down, stay safe. The honest answer is no, but not for the reason they expect. I don't regret asking because the asking was never the mistake. The asking was the moment I found out the truth. Roderick didn't create the situation when he laughed at me. He only revealed it. The crack was already there. I'd been papering over it for 6 years. All I did was stop holding the paper up. The value you create doesn't vanish just because someone refuses to put it on paper. It lives in your hands, in your relationships, in the trust of the people who've watched you work. Nobody can laugh that out of existence. The most a person like Roderick can do is convince you it isn't real. And the day you stop believing him is the day you find out exactly how real it was. He told me to find something my size. I run 22 stores I partly own, with a team that owns it alongside me, supplied by the same vendors who chose us on a system I'm proud of. Turns out my size was never the problem. The problem was that he could only ever picture me at his. If this one landed for you, the smallest thing you can do is hit subscribe. It genuinely helps these stories reach the next person who needs to hear them. And together we're working towards 7,000 subscribers. No pressure, no big speech, just tap subscribe if you want more, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you so much for reaching out and sharing your thoughts with us. We truly appreciate the time you took to connect, as your feedback is incredibly valuable to our team. Please rest assured that we are looking into this carefully, and we'll get back to you with a full update soon.